Couple of season-ending injuries, quarterback problems all over the ACC, not just at Pitt, the what-if game. We got a lot of stuff to talk to. This is going to be sort of a potpourri or the old Pitt-pourri of topics here on the Morning Pitt. But that's what we're going to do, give you a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of stuff to think about here on the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, sometimes I don't know what to do for that opening, the cold open, as they say in the industry. I just kind of want to sit down and be like, look, I'm going to talk about a bunch of different topics, and we'll see. I got like a list written down of things I want to talk about. We'll see how many we get to, and hopefully we get to all of them, but we'll find out. And so let's just do it. That's what I usually want to say when I sit down on before a show like this one, where we got a bunch of topics to cover. But instead, I'll just go for hitting a few of the highlights, and hopefully we at least talk about the things that I mentioned there in the opening. Sometimes I'll mention like 4 or 5 things in the open, and then we'll only get to like 3 of them, and hopefully nobody keeps track of that and says like, hey, you never actually talked about this. But usually we push that forward to the next episode and talk about it then. Either way, it's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. There's a website below. You want to keep up with everything going on in the world of Pitt sports, football, basketball, recruiting, everything going on at Pitt. It's Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We really do try to cover everything. We had some wrestling content over the weekend. Obviously, yesterday's Morning Pitt, we talked about a lot of sports, covered a lot of ground from, everything that happened over the course of those 4 days when Pitt Athletics had a lot of success, a lot of really good success. So we try to do everything we can there at Panther-Lair.com with a heavy emphasis, of course, on football, basketball, and recruiting. But it's all there at Panther-Lair.com. And our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, the place you can find all of our Pitt video content. Press conference videos, post-game press conferences, Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. The live stream, the live Panther-Lair show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We'll have that tomorrow night. Me and Jim Hammett will hang out with you for an hour, 8:30 to 9:30. Pretty much like a pregame show. We're going to lead right into the Pitt, Florida basketball game in Brooklyn. We won't be in Brooklyn, but we'll be here talking about it for an hour before the game starts. So it's like a pregame show, so tune in for that. That'll be a lot of fun. Of course, we'll have our postgame show after the Duke game on Saturday. That's a noon kickoff. So we're hoping around 3:30 we should be able to go live for the postgame show and have a lot of fun. I think we'll have a good one, an entertaining one to close the football season. And then we'll start planning out some basketball postgame shows. Probably, I would think tentatively, like road games on the weekend is when we'll probably get most of our basketball postgame shows, but we'll see how it all kind of works out, how it shakes out. I'll keep you posted, though. I'll make sure you know. If you want to make sure that you don't miss any of our postgame shows or any of our live streams or any of our video content here, you always like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you can turn on notifications and you get an alert sent to your phone whenever we go live or whenever we post anything new. That way you won't miss it. So do that. All right, news coming out of Pat Narduzzi's press conference yesterday. Gavin Bartholomew, Devin Danielson done for the season. I think this was sort of expected. I think we thought it would happen. Both guys got hurt in the Syracuse game. Neither one dressed for the Boston College game last week, last Thursday. And when that was the case, that plus a few of the things we had been hearing, it sort of sounded like time was up for those guys on this season. For Devin Danielson, that means the end of his Pitt career. Former Thomas Jefferson standout, played 6 seasons at Pitt. His rookie year, his freshman year was 2018. He's been around for a lot. He's been through 2 Coastal titles, one ACC championship, a Sun Bowl win, a Detroit Bowl win, a Sun Bowl loss, and a Peach Bowl loss. He's seen a lot. He's seen the Kenny Pickett years. He's seen the Keaton Slovis and Phil Dracovic and Christian Veyer years, and Nate Yarnell. Although he did not start the same game that Yarnell did, but Devin Danielson's seen a lot. He's been around a lot. He's been a good program guy. Not necessarily the most impactful player at defensive tackle when you look at statistics. Danielson played 60 games over the course, basically since 2018, started 20, recorded a grand total in 60 games of 78 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. And it's not a big number, right? I mean, 1.5 of those tackles for loss and 1.5 sacks came this season. And you know, we said it through the offseason after Danielson and the other super senior defensive tackles, Tyler Bentley and David Green, announced that they were coming back. We've said it in the past too, that those guys just weren't really that productive and aren't really that productive. And I think they can make impacts. They can make an impact in different ways that might not show up in the box score, but they just haven't been that productive. And it's evidenced by the numbers there. 60 games played, 78 tackles, less than 10 tackles for loss, less than 5 sacks. And I don't, there's something to be said for sort of a traditional defensive tackle, eat up blocks, try and create space and opportunities for the defensive ends and the linebackers to go make plays. And I'll also, willingly admit that I think if you follow Pitt, you've been spoiled in recent years by production from the defensive tackle position, whether it's, Kalijah Cansey last year or Jalen Twyman in 2019 or all the way back to Aaron Donald in 2013 and throughout his career, really. We've seen some really productive defensive tackles, but that probably skews the perception and expectation of what that position should do, or often does or usually does. You don't usually get that much production. You don't typically get Twyman, Cansey, Donald level production out of defensive tackles. But I don't think it's wrong also to have hoped for more out of Danielson, Bentley, and Green. And ultimately, when those guys, when their Pitt careers end, Danielson's is over now. Bentley and Green will have one more game to play, and then they'll be done. Ultimately, we'll probably look back at them as guys who played a lot of snaps, played a lot of games, were part of a lot of wins, didn't necessarily put up much in the way of production. And that's just the reality of what they've done, and who they've been, and that's what they are. And not everybody's going to be an All-American, not everybody's going to be an All-ACC pick, not everybody's going to be a first-round draft pick like Aaron Donald or Kalijah Cansey. But I think it's okay to have, wished for more production out of those guys, particularly in their 6th year. And I think some of the issues, maybe not all, but a decent amount of the issues in stopping the run is tied to the interior defensive line. Now, that's an issue that's shared by the defensive ends. It's shared by the linebackers. I mean, everybody sort of has a hand in why Pitt's run defense has struggled like it has. But the defensive tackles are part of that. And it's sort of an unfortunate way to end, in addition to the fact that they ended their careers on for Danielson, and it ends with the team 3-8. Even though even he didn't play in the last game, and his best case scenario, his final year at Pitt, the Panthers went 4-8, and so that's kind of that's certainly disappointing for him and a guy who's been around for a long time. Bartholomew obviously is another blow. He was also hurt in the Syracuse game, did not dress for the Boston College game, and I think that was sort of expected that he was probably done for the season. Bartholomew this year, 18 catches, 326 yards, and 1 touchdown. And look, I mean, I've said enough about El Barto over this season and the last 2 seasons of his just complete lack of usage. It's gotten to the point where Gavin Bartholomew has been so underutilized that people are sometimes even asking the question like, well, maybe he's not that good. To which I say, every time he gets the ball, something good happens. He is remarkably productive for a guy who really gets limited opportunities and limited targets and limited catches. He set career highs for receptions and receiving touchdowns his freshman year. His numbers have only taken a step back since 2021. He had 4 touchdown catches in 2021. He's had 3 over the last 2 seasons. He's a guy who makes things happen and has done that consistently over the course of 13 games in 2021, 13 games last year, and 9 games this year. 10 games this year, excuse me. And so that's 36 games of evidence And he wasn't always utilizing all 36, so maybe you don't say there's 36 games of evidence, but most of those 36 games, he's had some kind of opportunity, one or two, and has made something happen with almost every one of those opportunities. I mean, he's legitimately a weapon in the passing game who just can't buy a target right now. Can't buy a target from this coaching staff, can't buy a target from these quarterbacks, can't buy a target from this offensive coordinator and this offensive system. And it doesn't make any sense, and it never will make any sense. Nothing, unless it turns out that Gavin Bartholomew only has one foot and he's been using a prosthetic in his other foot for the last 2 seasons, which I don't mean to joke about, but there's no plausible explanation for why Gavin Bartholomew has been as underutilized as he has been. And now his season is over and he's missing the final 2 games. And what did you get out of him for the first 10? Career high in yardage, but only 18 catches through 10 games. And I know the passing game as a whole has struggled, but they eventually figured out ways to get the ball to Bub Means, and Bub Means developed some consistency. They figured out ways to get the ball to Konate Mumfield, and Konate Mumfield developed some consistency. Alberto should be one of the primary targets on this team, one of the primary playmakers. And the fact that he has been so underutilized, I mean, it's a real disappointment, and it's a real failure. Truly, on the part of this offense. And you can place that wherever you want, on the quarterbacks, on the coordinator, on the scheme, it doesn't matter. Somebody messed up. Somebody failed that guy only caught 18 passes this year. Somebody messed up. Somebody failed. And that's unfortunate. But his season's over. And 7 touchdowns over the course of his first 3 seasons at Pitt. That's not what you should be able to get out of that guy. It's just not. But Malcolm Epps will step in. Carter Johnson will step in. Both of those guys played season highs in snaps against Boston College. Carter Johnson's actually had a pretty decent run with Nate Yarnell. He had, what do you have against Boston College? I just had these. He had 2 catches for 36 yards against Boston College. He had a 50-yard catch from Yarnell in the Notre Dame game. So 3 catches for 86 yards from Nate Yarnell to Carter Johnson. Malcolm Epps caught Yarnell's first pass attempt in the Boston College game. It was a 24-yard pickup. And then he had 2 catches from Yarnell at the end of the Syracuse game, 2 for 43. So he's got 3 for 69 from Yarnell. And Johnson has 3 for 86 from Yarnell. So Nate Yarnell at least is throwing to the tight ends a little bit, and he's putting up some production. And those guys will play those roles, and I think they'll see a lot of snaps again this week at Duke. And probably get some decent targets from Nate Yarnell as well. I mean, you're limited to some extent by how much this passing game will even do. I think there's a ceiling on what this offense can become and what this offense can accomplish and what this passing game in particular can accomplish. But within that ceiling, I think Nate Yarnell has found the tight ends and done a good job getting the ball to them. And I think he'll continue to do that. So that's Pitt. That's the news there. We talk about Nate Yarnell being Pitt's 3rd starting quarterback this season. And I was having a conversation with our good friend Jerry DiPaolo, who had maybe one of the best lines in the press conference yesterday, Pat Narduzzi's weekly press conference. Jerry has a wrist brace on. He hurt himself. And he's asking a question to Pat Narduzzi, always sitting right in the front row, very close to Narduzzi. And Narduzzi says, what happened to your wrist? How'd you hurt yourself? And Jerry says, I don't talk about injuries. And, in a season with very few highlights, in a season where there's just not very many memorable things that have happened, that one's up there. That's pretty high up there. We salute you, Jerry, for finally giving it back after all these years of getting that response. Kudos to you. But I was talking to Jerry, and we were talking about just sort of the state of quarterbacks in the ACC. And obviously Pitt is in a difficult spot. But as you run down, and I think probably the Florida State situation with Jordan Travis was what made me really start thinking about it. It wasn't that long ago. It was like last year or the year before when we were talking about the ACC being one of the best conferences in the country for quarterbacks, having some of the best. I mean, particularly in 2021, when Kenny Pickett and Sam Howell were here. into last year with Drake May and Malik Cunningham and, Travis himself. And this year, it is just a mess. I mean, we think it's bad around here, and it is. I mean, it's one of the worst quarterback situations, maybe the worst quarterback situation in the conference. But it's ugly all over the place. I mean, Syracuse dealing with injury problems. Duke down to their third guy with injury problems. Florida State now changing guys due to injury. You've got places like Miami and NC State where they bench their starter. Tyler Van Dyke at Miami and Brennan Armstrong at NC State, only to have to then go back to those guys. Miami because they had an injury to the backup who they replaced Van Dyke with. NC State because after they benched Brennan Armstrong and brought in the sophomore MJ Morris leads him to, he goes 3-1 as a starter. He beats Clemson, he beats Miami, and then he's like, I'm out. I'm redshirting. I'm not going to play anymore. I'm done this season. And they claim that he, or his father or somebody claims that he's not going to transfer, but I don't know. That's the kind of move you make when you are going to transfer. So they've had to go back to Brennan Armstrong, although Armstrong had 4 touchdowns against, I think they played Virginia Tech over the weekend. He had 2 passing and 2 rushing touchdowns. So sort of, a nice return for him. But that was a situation of sort of their own making. And then bad luck where they changed quarterbacks, tried to get better, and then ended up, having to go back to those guys, which is a pretty ugly situation. Wake Forest is just a mess at quarterback. Virginia, who knows what's going on there. Clemson, I mean, certainly looks like they might need to go to the portal for a lot of things, and I wouldn't have quarterback too far down the list. But if you look around the ACC this year, 14 teams in the conference, 8 out of the 14, by my count, going into the final week of the regular season are going to be starting a quarterback who is not their starter in week 1. 8 out of the 14. And really, you could bump that number up to 10 out of 14 if you include Miami and NC State. They didn't want their week 1 starter to be the starter heading into the regular season finale, but they're kind of stuck with those guys again. But I mean, really, you can include them in that list. I mean, if what's his name at the Miami backup, is it Emory Williams or Emory Jones? I get these guys. I'm getting the names confused. Yeah, Emory Williams. Sorry. If Emory Williams doesn't get hurt, Tyler Van Dyke is still the start, or is still on the bench, and Williams is starting. So you would add them to this list. And if MJ Morris doesn't tap out and say I'm going to redshirt this year, he would be starting. So you would have 10 out of 14 teams in the conference starting different quarterbacks than the ones they went with to open the season. Now, a few of those teams made the choice. Pitt made the choice to change quarterbacks. Virginia Tech made the choice to change from Grant Wells to Kyron Drones. I forget, Wells might have gotten hurt, and they went with Drones, and Drones ended up being better. But Boston College made the choice to change from Emmett Moorhead to Thomas Castellanos. There were some instances where it was, their own decision. A lot of these, it wasn't. They had injury problems or guys just stunk. I mean, I think Wake Forest has changed quarterbacks a bunch of times intentionally, and they just haven't been able to get it right. There's really only 2 or 3 good quarterback. Well, I shouldn't say 2 or 3 good quarterback situations right now, because some of those teams that are starting a different guy in the finale than they started in week 1, I think are in a pretty good spot. I think Kyron Drones is a pretty good option for Virginia Tech. He looks good. I think Castellanos is going to be good at Boston College. I like him. Haynes King has been pretty good at Georgia Tech. He's one of these guys who started from the beginning of the season. Obviously, Carolina's got a good situation right now with Drake May, although you would assume that's going to come to an end here. Jack Plummer has been good at Louisville. But the only teams that are starting their same guy from week 1 to the end of the season are Carolina, Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Louisville. If we don't count Miami and NC State. So Pitt has obviously had some quarterback issues this year. And I think you can make a case that really, I mean, probably who's got the worst situation? Probably either Pitt or Wake Forest. Syracuse is in a lot of trouble right now. I mean, but that's due to injury. Pitt and Wake Forest just stink. Their quarterback situations are just bad. And they have been pretty much all season, which is wild when, 2 years ago you had the Heisman Trophy finalist and a guy who is currently the, active passing touchdowns leader in FBS, facing off in the ACC championship game. And 2 years later, you've got probably the 2 worst quarterback situations in the conference. Not I guess, Florida State, we'll see how Tate Rodemaker, I always said Rodemaker when he was getting recruited by Pitt. We'll see how he ends up being, but that situation could be right up there. Virginia, seems like a mess, but that whole situation's a mess. So I guess my point is, it's bad at Pitt. It's certainly bad at Pitt. It might be the worst at Pitt, but this whole conference has just been a quarterback mess all season long. It really has. Intentionally or otherwise, injury or otherwise, poor play or otherwise, it's been a mess start to finish. And a few teams will come out of this year feeling good about their options at quarterback, but a whole lot of them have some questions to answer. A whole lot. Pitt certainly among them. Oh, speaking of quarterback, they did put Nate Yarnell at the top of the depth chart, so I think we all knew he was going to start at Duke. It's nice to see the official confirmation on the 2 deep. So that change was made. That was pretty much the only changes to the depth chart this week, other than taking Gavin Bartholomew and Devin Danielson off the 2 deep. But otherwise, I think we expected Nate Yarnell to start, and he's going to. So he'll get a second audition heading into the offseason to show what he can do, and maybe make his case a little bit for next season. We'll see how that goes. All right, appreciate you tuning in today. Get a hit on a couple of different topics. We'll have a lot of hoops talk tomorrow leading into the Florida game. And then, of course, we'll have the pregame show tomorrow night, 8:30 p.m. right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you don't miss any of our video content and you won't miss the live stream tomorrow night, 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Appreciate you watching today. Hope you've had a great start to your week. I hope you enjoy your Tuesday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow morning on the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.